This recording is published by Langogh, 2025. This recording is copyright. This is the IELTS listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. You will hear a man or woman speaking to a group of people. You will be asked to answer questions based on the recording. You will have 30 seconds to read the questions before the recording begins. Now listen carefully and answer questions.
Good morning, everyone. Today's lecture focuses on one of the most fascinating aspects of ancient history, the development and profound significance of trade routes that connected distant civilizations. We'll explore how these networks shaped not only economies but also cultures, religions, and technological advancement across continents. Let's begin with perhaps the most famous of all ancient trade routes, the Silk Road. Now, it's important to understand that the Silk Road wasn't actually a single road at all. Rather, it was an extensive network of interconnected trade routes spanning from East Asia to the Mediterranean. This remarkable network was established approximately 130 BCE during the Han Dynasty in China, though some trading along portions of these routes occurred even earlier. The term Silk Road itself is relatively modern, coined by a German geographer in the 19th century, but it perfectly captures the essence of what made this route so valuable. Silk, that luxurious fabric produced exclusively in China for many centuries, was indeed the primary commodity traded westward along these routes. The Chinese guarded the secret of silk production zealously, maintaining a monopoly that generated enormous wealth. Imagine the wonder of Roman aristocrats when they first encountered this shimmering, lightweight fabric. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen. The demand for silk in the West was so intense that it created a continuous flow of caravans across treacherous terrain. The scale of the Silk Road was truly impressive. The main routes covered over 6,400 kilometers, stretching from the ancient Chinese capital of Chang'an, now known as Xi'an, all the way to the Mediterranean ports. Merchants rarely traveled the entire distance themselves. Instead, goods passed through numerous hands, moving from one trading post to another. This relay system meant that prices increased substantially by the time products reached their final destinations, but it also meant that trade could continue even during periods of political instability in particular regions. Now, while the Silk Road dominates historical discussions, we mustn't overlook the equally significant maritime trade routes. These sea lanes connected the ports of China, India, Arabia, and East Africa, creating what some historians call the Maritime Silk Road. These routes were particularly dominated by Arab and Persian traders, who possessed superior nautical knowledge and shipbuilding technology. The dhow, their distinctive sailing vessel, was perfectly adapted to the conditions of the Indian Ocean. The maritime routes were especially important for the spice trade. Spices like pepper and cinnamon were worth their weight in gold in ancient times. These weren't merely culinary luxuries, they were essential for food preservation, medicine, and religious ceremonies. The spice trade generated such enormous profits that it motivated European exploration centuries later, ultimately leading to the Age of Discovery. What made these maritime routes particularly efficient was the navigation system that developed around seasonal monsoon winds. Traders learned to harness these predictable wind patterns, sailing eastward during one season and returning westward during another. This knowledge transformed the Indian Ocean into a highway of commerce, with journey times that could be calculated with reasonable accuracy. However, the true significance of ancient trade routes extends far beyond the mere exchange of goods. These networks became conduits for cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. Buddhism, for instance, spread from India to China, Central Asia, and eventually to Japan and Southeast Asia, following the trade routes. Monasteries and temples sprang up along the Silk Road, serving not only as places of worship but also as rest stops and centers of learning for merchants and travelers. The transfer of technological innovations between civilizations was equally remarkable. Paper-making technology traveled from China to the Islamic world, and eventually to Europe. The technique of glassmaking moved in the opposite direction, from the Mediterranean to East Asia. Mathematical concepts, including the Indian numeral system that we use today, spread through merchant networks. Astronomical instruments and navigation techniques were shared and refined through continuous interaction. Artistic techniques and motifs also flowed along these routes, creating fascinating hybrid styles. Persian miniature painting influenced Indian Mughal art, which in turn affected artistic traditions further east. Musical instruments, architectural styles, and decorative patterns crossed cultural boundaries, enriching civilizations along the way. The famous blue and white porcelain that we associate with China actually derived its distinctive cobalt blue pigment from Persia. The economic consequences of these trade networks were profound. Trade routes led to the rise of wealthy merchant cities that served as crucial hubs. Cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar in Central Asia became legendary for their prosperity and cosmopolitan atmosphere. These cities invested their wealth in magnificent architecture, libraries, and centers of learning. They became melting pots where different cultures, languages, and ideas mixed freely. The wealth generated by trade also funded the development of infrastructure. Caravanserais, fortified roadside inns, were built at regular intervals along land routes, providing safety and accommodation for merchants and their animals. Wells were dug, bridges constructed, and roads maintained, all to facilitate commerce. This infrastructure, in turn, encouraged even more trade, creating a positive cycle of economic growth. The impact of ancient trade routes on language and communication is often underestimated. Pidgin languages developed at trading posts, allowing merchants who spoke different native languages to conduct business. Certain languages, like Persian and later Arabic, became lingua francas across vast regions, facilitating not just trade but also diplomatic relations and scholarly exchange. The decline of these ancient routes in the 15th and 16th centuries came about through several factors. The Mongol Empire, which had once provided stability and security across much of the Silk Road, fragmented. The rise of the Ottoman Empire created obstacles for European merchants trying to access Asian goods through traditional overland routes. The increasing frequency of plague outbreaks, including the devastating Black Death, was partly attributed to the disease spreading along trade routes. These factors combined to make sea routes around Africa increasingly attractive, ultimately leading to the age of exploration and the establishment of new global trade networks. In conclusion, ancient trade routes like the Silk Road and maritime networks were far more than commercial pathways. They were the arteries of the ancient world, pumping not just goods but ideas, technologies, religions, and cultural practices across vast distances. They connected civilizations that might otherwise have developed in isolation, creating a level of globalization that wouldn't be matched again until the modern era. Understanding these roots helps us appreciate that our interconnected world isn't entirely new. It's built on foundations laid thousands of years ago by adventurous merchants, curious travelers, and open-minded societies willing to embrace foreign ideas and innovations. Thank you for your attention today.
Visit langogh.com to view the answers to these questions or to access more tests.